Good morning. I'd like to welcome you all heartily. I'd like to start with a few statistics concerning the Polish market, and then we can move on to the salt of the land, that is regulatory matters. Let me start with statistics concerning a global context that we need to understand. The essence of the first day, the core of the first day of the conference is to show a broader context. This year we would like to get your interest in the process of decision-making that is taking place at a much larger scale than Poland. Of course, the main player here is the European Commission, but also a number of other crucial organizations, the Office for Electronic Communications and many other regulators outside are involved. One of the institutions or think tanks is ITU UNESCO Broadband Commission or think tank. That's the highest decision-making level in terms of a general approach to the development of the world's ICT market. You could say that if you study something at a great scale, for sure it won't concern a particular market like a Polish market, but from my experience being member of that commission, it is the case. Certain patterns, certain values developed by the members of the national administrations, that is, national presidents, prime ministers, certain ministers, regulators, representatives of high-level management of worldwide ICT companies, as well as social associations, as well as R&D units and academic circles. All of those people are trying to develop a compromise, but first of all, we need to speak one language, especially in terms of an understanding of statistics globally and understanding certain processes in the economy and social processes. Now, I'm an engineer and I am very exact in my activity. I work based on facts and numbers. I am greatly attached to them. It's very difficult sometimes to think out of the box, move outside the telecom market in Poland. I think we need to talk out in a broader context, so I'd like to offer an intellectual and philosophical exercise to you. Let's start with some statistics that will show us how we can release Industry 4.0 and its potential, and all about the worldwide interactions in B2B, B2C markets. So what happens at the industrial level and between the industry and consumers. Sometimes we don't recognize this industrial layer in everyday life, but it's critical, and it's indeed the driving vehicle for the fourth industrial revolution. It's estimated that a 10% increase in broadband, so 10% increase in the coverage, penetration of broadband directly translates into GDP. And that's approximately 1.5% if the driving vehicle is mobile services, and 0.8% if the driving vehicle is fixed services. Of course, this is due to effective management of the infrastructure. It's much easier to build wireless networks, especially in developing countries in Latin America and Africa, Oceania. In Poland, if we translated this ratio into penetration, we are one of the main leaders in terms of penetration with mobile internet, but we are still trailing in terms of fixed internet. But the influence on GDP is unquestionable. 2015, the European Commission prepared a report showing the main indicators, access to broadband. Right now, 66% of the world's population is within 50 kilometers of fiber optic nodes. So in terms of skeleton, the core network, we have gone past the break-even point, but we still need to cover the remaining 50 kilometers. Now, the total capex on investment in terms of mobile infrastructure is 1.3 trillion USD. 75% of that is investment into fast networks, broadband networks, 5G. So this is going to be the driving vehicle for the industrial revolution and access to superfast internet. Now, combining a consumer market and B2B market, that is industry, approximately 51% of the world's population has access to the internet, whether mobile or fixed. Now, if we look at what's going on in terms of the main economic silos, in broadband development is 5G, the Internet of Things, and both of those components feed the Industrial Revolution. This question is very often asked by journalists. What will happen first? Is 5G going to be used by individual consumers? Right now, we know that we are lagging behind in Europe in terms of delivery of infrastructure, or whether IoT industry will be first. Well, it's very difficult for me to answer that question. I'm not sure, but I think that both sectors of the economy are going to grow at a similar rate. We will see what's the situation in other countries and continents. In the United States, it's IoT. In Asiatic markets, is consumer markets, very strong demand. The fact that we have 31 billion IoT devices in the market shows that industrial development is non-trivial, and therefore, starting from the economic understanding of this process and managing the frequencies. Now, Poland is not the only country thinking about retaining one frequency range for some additional applications in the future, IoT applications. From the point of view of consumers, it's very important to have a broader perspective of the industry, although this has not been fully appreciated, and regulators in many countries do not have the right competence or vision about the future direction of change. But to be able to talk about it, first of all, we need to think about a strategy, and we believe that this such a strategy developed at the Broadband Commission will enable us to develop some general framework that will be in the future transposed into the European context. Now, there are some major points or digital know-how. That is a certain way of developing and using knowledge. It's not only digital competence, which is critical to young people. The project that we organize, 70,000 consumers that we reach every year with digital competences. It's the largest project in Poland, one of the largest in Europe, and very interesting on a global scale. What we mean is digital know-how in the industry and in administration, so that the administration would realize what's going on and so that they would be able to follow those developments and contribute to them. Now, then, a multi-stakeholder collaboration that is critical in Europe. We cooperate with the Office for Competition and Consumer Protection. We also deal with property market. We use Article 38 to grant access, but there are also other economic sectors, energy sector, logistics, and several other. Telecommunications, our sector, of course, could be a driving vehicle for changes. It's an indispensable element of industrial transformation and a cross-sectoral approach to understand how the economy functions, not only from the standpoint of our country or our sector as operators, companies, administration, but we need to understand how to cooperate with other sectors of the economy, not only in Poland, but also internationally.
We identified four main areas, most important from our point of view. First of all, effective regulation, and not only referring to our core telecommunications business, but also on labor market, on taxation, those issues that chambers and organizations like those run by business people specialize in. But that approach has to concern different branches of the economy. This is really important in developing countries where access to telecommunications is cited together with access to water or access to electricity. Then fostering innovation. We need to understand that we cannot create the reality on our own. Of course, administration can shape part of the reality, but the market has a great impact on what's going on. Sebastian Soriano said that when it comes to OTT operators, institutions like the European Commission or BEREC should start thinking about how to coexist, not how to regulate. The market is so global that there are no clear rules and it can't be managed on the European or national level. Market development. We need statistics, we need data. I remember my conversation with Jeffrey Sachs when I participated in the first meeting of the Broadband Committee in New York. And I remember a case of one of the African countries. We were to carry out mapping. So I volunteered to be active in this group. And I hoped to share the Polish experience. And at some point, when I told my story of how we built the network, of how different entities compete, but then Sachs said, but what are you talking about? We are talking about a country where people have difficulty with access to education, with access to electricity. And in Poland, the situation is quite different. The penetration of mobile is different. So I understood that sometimes you can't have a conversation if you don't have a global understanding. This is a very difficult thing to achieve, to have this common understanding among decision makers. And the last thing is capacity building. So building capacities, but also building the scale. And this is the slogan that we have heard many times. This is what industrial plans very often say, that we need to increase our scale. Sometimes it means fighting your competition. But capacity building is first and foremost about understanding that a whole branch of industry has to be addressed with solutions. For example, we have seen that many actions have been taken, that spectrum has been distributed, but some things are operational in Asia, in Korea, but here in Poland we are still waiting for those processes to take off. Bearing in mind those four main points, you need to remember that there are some institutions which which you can go to understand more, to learn, to get this global outlook. So there is no better way to understand future trends than to actually participate in the process of those trends being created. So I would recommend CAPT conference where you can learn about standardization efforts in Europe. There is also a body of European regulators for electronic communications, BEREC. This is an institution that is to observe the principle of independence of regulators, but at the same time, it is to harmonize our efforts. It also has its soft tools like recommendations that can establish a kind of roadmap for regulators and for the market. And then in Poland, I'm very happy that our chambers and organizations want to get involved in the works of BEREC. What's going in BEREC when it comes to the implementation of European telecommunications code, and I try to relay information to all interested parties. And then Eastern Partnership, I have a great honor to be the head of its ICT department. Eastern Partnership is an institution that deals with those like-minded countries who would like to join the European Union, who want to get inspired by the European legal solutions when it comes to capacity building, when it comes to improving skills, when it comes to roaming, spectrum management, and so on. But we also deal with broadband development and infrastructure development, and then International Telecommunications Union. You could say this is the biggest organization under the aegis of the United Nations. It gives you access to standardization. It helps you understand global processes. ITU is based on 4 pillars. It brings together businesses, NGOs, social partners, and governmental partners. And another scope for their activity is the academia. And all of this feeds into the Broadband Commission for Sustainable Development. What we do is we aggregate knowledge from all those 4 institutions, and those 4 institutions meet during our plenary sessions. Between the plenary sessions, we work in working groups. And working groups produce documents that can be seen as a roadmap that could serve for guidance, for actions and measures to be implemented all over the world. What are the main aims of the Broadband Commission? I mentioned that 49% of people around the globe are not connected to broadband. So our aim is to achieve 75% broadband penetration worldwide and to achieve 65% in developing countries and 35% in least developed countries. We would also like to have over 60% of households have digital skills, active digital skills. So I don't mean only being able to browse the websites. We mean people with knowledge on how to get education online. And then 40% of digital financial skills. Our telecommunications industry is a bit more advanced than the financial industry, but I would say that teleinformatics it feeds the banking industry, and in many countries, this is the driver behind social and economic changes. So our aim is to have 30% of world population to use financial services online. The Broadband Commission works in working groups. One of those working groups deals with connecting to broadband. We cooperate with the World Bank to create incentives for those countries where there are no European funds, there are no other funds, where most of infrastructure projects are carried out with public funds or accelerated by private funds, very often accelerated by satellite companies. Our experts also cooperate with the World Bank when it comes to contracts for the Eastern Partnership countries. We also try to prepare a special program for the African countries. Child Safety Online with ZANE, with Childhood Foundation, with the participation of the Office of Electronic Communications. What we do is we raise awareness of how to protect children online. Another thing is kind of what we do in Poland, but worldwide. This is a project that is a novelty in Europe, but in other places, in Southern America, in Oceania, those projects are being carried out with the participation of UNESCO, UNICEF, ITO, so Global School Connectivity Initiative. It's about finding and creating investment incentives, creating infrastructure, then equipping schools with IT equipment, but also improving skills of the teachers. So we may say that the students are only the final stage of this whole process that has to be in place. But this is all costly. So you also need to know how to find investment mechanisms. So 21st century financing models for sustainable broadband development. This work group specializes in investment schemes. And you need to remember that very often we create that kind of schemes for countries with a totally different return on investment than we have in Europe. On the macro scale, we have to remember about the main principle, leave no one behind. And this main principle could be expressed on the level of our broadband committee. We could express it by saying something different, by saying let's connect the unconnected. We have 51% of those connected, so we have 49 to connect. And we assume that we would like to have 75% of those connected until 2025. Our task is to look for drivers for digital transformation, look for investments. This is what the Office of the International Telecommunications Union do. And today we will have Doreen Martin with us. She is also the executive director of the ITU Broadband Committee. Doreen unfortunately couldn't come here due to travel restrictions, but she prepared a short video address that we'll be able to see on stage in a minute. And ladies and gentlemen, let's meet informally. Let's have some one-to-one conversations and let's talk about all those important issues like international standardization. Thank you very much